All right, well, happy Friday, everybody. I am Nick Slavik. I'm the host of Ask a Painter Live. It's a weekly live Facebook show where I use my over 2 decades of experience as a painter, a craftsman, a colorist, wallpaper hanger, and historic restorationist to answer any of your questions. I'm also the proprietor of the Nick Slavik Painting and Restoration Company, a residential repaint company based here in New Prague, Minnesota. And give me 1 second. I'm going to have my senior apprentice turn down that air-assisted machine. I'll be right here. Jim, why don't you, let's bring up Jim here. Today we're going to have a special guest, Jim Callahan. He's a homeowner here from Minnesota. We grew up not that far away from each other, so we've been, we know each other relatively well. And Jim was going to come on today and answer a bunch of questions. So, hey Jim, how's it going?
Hey, good, Nick. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Hey, real quick, why don't you give people a little background about yourself? I'm going to go have my apprentice turn down that sprayer back there so we can have a good conversation. 2 minutes.
I'm from New Prague, Minnesota originally. I've known Nick for a long time. I actually worked for him in the summer of 2013 just as a laborer, a painter with him. I'm a 6th through 12th grade band director, and I do a little bit of painting as a summer job currently at a different school district than mine. And I kind of like to putz around with home DIY type stuff.
Awesome. And Jim, thank you so much for doing this here. This is, I don't take it lightly that you're willing to broadcast over here with me and go over and ask a bunch of questions here. I thought we would start off with you just sort of asking whatever you want to. The 2 main focuses I want to go over today are, general painting questions, and I'd also like to cover, if you were to hire a pro, your general questions, and then if you have any rapid fire questions, we can knock those out at the end.
Okay, yeah, I came up with a list of 10 things, I guess, so that's fine.
Awesome, you go right ahead. Shoot from the hip, and we'll take it from there, Jim.
All right, number 1, if a wall gets dinged and you have the paint to fix it, how can you cover it without the new paint shining through, and how can you make it blend nicely?
In reality, not an easy way. What I tell all my homeowners and my apprentices too, that 99% of touch-ups don't match. So once in a while, I'll go into somebody's basement. They'll say, yeah, I don't want to repaint this huge stairwell wall, so putty the hole. I have the can of paint. Just touch it up. And common sense would tell you, well, it's the same paint from the same can that was used on the wall. The gods conspire, and it almost never matches, either with color or with shine. So what I basically do, it's more of a person management thing than anything else. I basically tell them, I will do whatever you ask me to do if you understand the possible outcomes of this. And I basically tell them, there's almost no chance that this will come out as a perfect match, shine match, color, everything. And then I put it on them, and I basically say, here's the cost to repaint the entire wall. Here's the cost to touch this up. If you have the homeowner have some skin on it, they can make the decision, but I'm very honest with them. But if you want to set yourself up for a possible touch-up that works, putty it, sand it smooth, find yourself, if it's a flat wall, figure out how much stipple, how much of that texture is on there, and you can get a little mini roller. They call them jumbo mini rollers. Wooster and Purdy makes them and everything else. You can get like a 1/4 inch or a 3-inch nap roller, and you can actually roll it on instead of brushing it on, because brushing it will be a completely different texture than rolling. So when I go through new construction, we're in a basement finish here. Excuse me. There's going to be some touch-ups. Excuse me. I'm coming down with a cold here. There's going to be touch-ups at the end of this project. So what I'll do is we'll use a mini roller and we'll replicate the texture that's already on the wall. So that's about the best way you can set yourself up for something like that. The best thing to know is that they almost never work out. So next question, Jim?
Yeah, okay. Kind of along the same lines, but if you need to patch a hole in drywall or replace a small section, what's best practice to do it so it matches. So I guess if it's like a bigger gouge and you actually have to cut a piece out, how do you make it blend? And maybe you kind of covered some of that already.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the two main kind of patching compounds that I use are, you know, what you see in new construction like this, which would be considered lightweight gypsum mud. And we just call that lightweight mud. And that's whenever you see a new home being built, whenever you see construction going on, there's those white 5-gallon buckets with the blue label on the front that says lightweight. That stuff, is very lightweight, easy to spread, takes a little longer to dry than some other spackles, but it sands just perfectly smooth. The other kind of mud that I use for small little holes here and there, or when we have to have a quick turnaround, is a vinyl spackle. The one that I prefer and readily available is from Red Devil. It's a more spongy sort of mud. It's not easy to skim over a whole large area, so it's really good for small holes. If you have to put it a little bit thicker, it doesn't shrink. It doesn't kind of dimple in or crack when it dries. So it's good. It's good for a bunch of small holes. So when we do our standard room repaints, we use a ton of vinyl mud. When we have a large area, we just had another basement project where we had to get rid of two bare outlets. There used to be speaker wires coming through, and they had the rectangles like this. We patched them, and then you want to use lightweight for that because you can apply it over 2 coats. You put the first coat on and make sure everything's nice and level. You sand it down, and then we do a much larger area. So if you have your outlet, like this, we usually go 2 or 3 inches around on the first coat, sand it smooth, so then you can probably still see a ridge. Then we go out about 10 inches on either side. That's how you actually get the nice smooth area. If you just take a lump of vinyl spackle and put it right over where that outlet used to be, when you paint it, you're just going to see a lump because you're adding to the wall. So when you replace an outlet like that, you want to take drywall and you want to set it in about an 1/8 inch behind the level of the wall. So you can take a drywall blade, maybe a 10-inch blade, you can set it across the opening and make sure that your patch is maybe an 1/8 inch behind it like that. So, did we lose Jim there? Jim, why don't you, there we go. We'll get Jim back on here. Looks like he popped off for a second there. There you are.
Hey, sorry.
No worries. Okay, did that answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I lost it on video. I can still hear you though.
You got another question, Jim?
Yep. If you want to repaint an interior room, what's best practice in terms of priming, using paint with primer additive, number of coats, etc.?
Primer and paint in one is 99% marketing and not so much actually something you'll be able to notice. If you use a very high-end paint, Benjamin Sherwin-Williams, a whole bunch of the other ones like that, if you use a higher end of that, it does everything those primer and paint does just by having a better resin system in the paint. So technically, if you read cans of super high-end exterior paint, interior paint, a lot of them are self-priming, but they're not paint and primer in one. There is paint and primer in one is not half a gallon of primer, half a gallon of paint. It's just designed more for friendly use for the homeowner. So if you're going to repaint a standard bedroom, if it's a tan bedroom and you're going to paint it tan again, there's absolutely no need for priming. Priming for me, interior, is only to get things to stick or to break the possibility of 3 top coats or 4 top coats. So if there's a drastic color change, if you have, excuse me, if you have a very dark gray bedroom that is going white, oftentimes I'll put a coat of white primer on there. Not because the primer needs to be there, but because a primer is relatively inexpensive, dries almost dead flat, and the next coats go on really smoothly over it. Technically, you could just do 3 top coats of paint. A tan paint going over a tan paint in a bedroom, you will never have adhesion issues unless there's atmospheric contamination from how we live, and it almost never happens. So you don't need to prime if you're just changing color. If you're in fear of going a white room and turning it blood red, I would definitely lay down a gray or a red primer first, and then your 2 top coats. You should really never do more than 2 top coats. So did that help, Jim?
Yeah, thanks. All right, number 4. What are some good tips for cutting in on ceilings, making the line straight, and getting good coverage?
The best tip I can give you is be a painter for 20 years. The next best tip I can give you is go out and spend somewhere between $16 and $22 on a nice brush. You want the general rule. What I found is that when you're doing exteriors of houses, maybe a 3 to a 3.5 to a 4-inch brush is good. All my apprentices, I teach them with 2.5-inch straight cut Purdy Pro Extra brushes. Wooster makes awesome ones too. It's just if you have a system that works awesome, is dependable, and they're readily available, don't change it. So we have tons and tons. We probably have 60 of those 2.5-inch Purdy Pro Elascos. They're 2.5 inches wide, and there's usually 2 versions. There is a thicker brush with more bristles. If you're looking at a brush from the side, this would be the fan. If you turn the brush to the side, there will be some brushes that are very thin and some brushes that are very thick. I use the brushes that are much thicker because they can hold more paint and go farther. Those brushes are very good. I probably buy 30 to 50 of them for an interior season. They last all winter long, and then I use them for summer. And because of the summer paints, the rough textures, and the paint that dries in them, usually at the end of the summer we turn them into cleaning brushes or throw them away. So if you as a homeowner go out and buy 2 or 3 of those brushes, you will never need to buy another brush again, and that will actually help you be a better painter. When you're talking about cutting in on ceiling lines, those bristles are set up in a way where they're a synthetic blend, so they hold a lot of paint, but at the end, they're called, the bristles are called flagged. It's just like split ends in your hair. They chop them at the end like that, so they get very furry, and that soft furry end is what perfectly contours to that ceiling line. With a really nice brush like that, you don't have to use a lot of pressure. You don't have to use a lot of tricks. If you think about the corner like this up here, the ceiling being here, if you put your brush at a nice 45, give the bristles a tiny bit of bend like this, barely any pressure, and run it along, you'll see those bristles almost contouring to the ceiling line like this. And the only other tip I can give you about cutting ceiling lines would be if you can get it within a 1/16 of an inch of a perfect line on the first coat, that second coat, filling in those little 1/16 inch valleys and gaps, it goes so easy. Don't really know why, but I teach all my apprentices that way, and if you try to do 2 perfect ceiling coats, you usually go too far on the first coat. If you leave it, if you give yourself a 1/16 inch worth of leeway without going onto the ceiling, that second coat, you basically just connect all those dots, those 1/16 inch little valleys, and it's just super smooth.
Okay. Number 5, what is the best way to patch a hole or gouge in woodwork, be it casing, trim, or paneling? Even stainable filler sometimes doesn't look the best.
Yeah, that's another one of those like paint and primer sort of things too. Is if you go down the big box store, the paint store, or the hardware store, you'll see 6 to 10 fillers there. Every one of them, well, there's probably one that won't say stainable. Almost every one will say stainable on it, and almost none are. So, especially if you're going dark colors. The best advice I can give you for that is just have reasonable expectations. There is a way to tint the filler a little bit. If you have some wood stain and an oil-based filler, you can massage some stain with either a palette knife or with your hands, and you can get it close, but a lot of those fillers don't take stain. One of the only ways to fix something like that is basically just bust out the artist brushes and get some gel stain, and you almost have to grain the patch yourself, and it's a very, very tricky situation. It depends so much on what the old wood looks like, what you're trying to make it look now. Is it at eye level or is it at the bottom of a door? A whole bunch of those things. So I know it's a super unsatisfying answer, but when a homeowner calls me, and the biggest job that I get called for that has this in it is dog scratches on doors. And people say, well, just sand them out. Well, if you sand down far enough to get rid of those dog scratches, you're basically going to wear, one of these in your door. So they all say, well, then just fill it and stain it and go back. And it never works. So I basically tell them, with the amount of labor that I have to go into this, you're not going to get a perfect outcome. You might as well just buy another interior door. And interior doors go for between $60 for a sort of standard 6-panel pine, hemlock, or oak door, up to a couple hundred. But you're guaranteed a good result at the end of it. And
right.
If it's linear woodwork, that's easy. I would pop that stuff off, stain match, and go for it. At least in my world, Jim.
Okay. Number 6, painting wood with chalk paint is in now. What's your opinion on this kind of paint from a homeowner perspective, not a professional?
Again, it's marketing genius. These paint companies come out with chalk paint, and they say not only is it self-priming, but it's super easy to well there. These chalk paint companies say it'll adhere to everything. It sands easy, and you don't need to top coat it. And none of those things are truthful. Chalk paint is basically a really, really poor paint. Think of like you go to Menards or one of the very, very big box stores, and if you go buy a $6 gallon of white ceiling paint, it's basically just chalk and water. That's what you're getting with chalk paint. You're basically painting your kitchen cabinets with $5 a gallon paint. So yes, it does sand easy, but it offers no protection, and it sticks to almost nothing unless you're lucky. So when a homeowner has me come in and paint their cabinets, there is I usually have to sit there for about 45 minutes and explain my process. I have a sheet that I give them that explains it, that lays out timelines. I teach a master's class about this for this reason. Basically, there's a huge gap between going down and buying a gallon of chalk paint and in a weekend doing your own cabinets with a brush versus me and 3 of my apprentices putting in hundreds of hours over 7 days to give you a finish. Now, mine is best case scenario. It will give you the nicest finish to look at, the most durable finish, and will give you the longest potential life. The other one is almost free to a homeowner and still takes a lot of time, but you get a varied outcome. So the best advice I can give you for that is use it on furniture, use it on decorative pieces. If you need protection, you have to top coat it with something, either an oil varnish, which will yellow over time, or a water-based top coat, a clear top coat. And that can either be a water-based polyurethane or a pure water-based. That will at least seal it in. And if you're still going to use chalk paint, just do a scratch test. This is the simplest thing in the world. Take a back of a cabinet door, however you're going to apply the chalk paint, roller or brush, put some on there, let it dry overnight, and go at it with your fingernail. And if you can scratch it off, you got to do something else to it.
Sounds good. Number 7, what are some do's and don'ts for interior painting in terms of resale value for picking colors and things like that?
I'm always conflicted with this because people want something that will resell, but you also have to live with it, and there is some sort of unquantifiable value to living with really cool colors that you like. Right now, if I get this situation once in a while where a bank calls me, they have a repossessed home, it's a fairly high-end home, they got a quick turnaround, get it on the market. If they just call me and say, hey, here's the address, make this house as sellable as possible, 5 to 8 years ago, I would have came in and I would have left all the woodwork alone and I would have painted all the walls Benjamin Moore Lennox tan. Nowadays, if I have my way, I would come in and I would offer to paint all the woodwork. Normally that's too high of an ask for a company just trying to get rid of a house. If not, I would go in and paint all the walls Benjamin Moore Himalayan Trend. In the last 5 years, the color palette has completely shifted from reddish and yellowish tans to cool grays and taupes. So in the timeline, or in the continuum of color, at least in neutrals, you have tan on one side, you have gray on the other. and kind of where they mix with, I refer to it as taupe. It's the brownish grays, and depending on the light, it can switch. If all I was worried about resale right now, I would definitely go with a cooler color palette right now. If your house has white woodwork already, good, you're ahead of the curve. If your house does not have white woodwork, you can consider painting it, but it is such a costly and time-consuming process. I would possibly get an estimate, give that to your realtor and say, listen, I'm not going to go through this because there is not a dollar for dollar return on most things you can do to your house right now. So if you spend, 30 grand repainting the entire inside of your house, you're not going to get 30 grand out of it. You're going to get something less than that. So you have to be very careful about what you do for sale. And I would grab that estimate, give it to the realtor and say, here's what it costs to paint all the woodwork in this house. If that next homeowner, if that's their only objection, take that price off the seller price. Here's the guy who will do it for you and pass it along. And that's something that I do with my realtors quite a bit. Because there's nothing more I hate than sort of just waste in general, where I come into a house, repaint the whole thing, the next homeowner comes in, I get a call, and then they want to add some color, and it's a wasteful process like that.
Okay, number 8. What is the shelf life for an open can of paint?
Open can of paint?
Yeah, like something you got laying around the house that was used a while ago or whatever.
Okay, like most things, I'll give you a couple examples, and I'll kind of let you interpret it from there. I have been in houses where weeks ago somebody has painted a wall, and I've gone downstairs and tried to touch up, and the paint has already done something in their basement. Maybe the lid wasn't on tight, maybe it got a little cold, maybe they somehow, human error got involved and the paint doesn't match, or something's up with the paint. So that's only been days or weeks. I've also gone into houses where 6 or 7 years later, I found a gallon of paint, I stirred it up, I used it, and it was perfectly good. So the better the paint, the longer it'll last. If you get some $5 a gallon ceiling paint, it's probably not going to go very far. But I would feel comfortable. Actually, here's another good example. I was actually just in Apple Valley. We redid an entire basement for a couple. They had paint that was 7 years old. They had a 5-gallon bucket of a mid-range paint, and they just wanted to save a little bit, so they asked me to use it. One of my senior apprentices went and took it to Sherwin-Williams, got it shaken up, used it, and it was perfectly fine. I think it was between 5 and 8 years old, so that was a sealed 5-gallon bucket.
Okay. Number 9. What is your preferred method for priming and painting newly hung drywall?
New drywall?
Yeah.
Oh, this is first and foremost in my mind right now. I'm actually getting ready to do a master's class for the PDCA at the National Expo this February, all about the perfect production process for new construction. And a large component of that has to do with what do you want to not only make it quick and make it the highest end possible finishes you can do. So in my shop right now, I have about 12 drywall samples with mud on them. I'm testing out all sorts of primers and top coats. About a month back, I queried the people on Facebook and Instagram to see what contractors use the most. I took the top, 6 to 8 of those, came up with some stuff on my own, and I'm testing them. I can tell you right now, if you are a homeowner and you're going to do like a basement finish, like this here, this is a doable project. Find some sort of PVA drywall primer. Polyvinyl acetate, I believe it's called. It's made especially for new drywall. It's a thin paint. You don't have to spend a lot of money on it. Really, this stuff is anywhere between, $8 and $12, $15 a gallon. And it's made perfectly for drywall. You put it on, you brush, roll, you spray. After you clean the drywall off, you sand it down again. I take a pole sander, a round pole sander, and just sort of sand off, because you're imparting a lot of moisture into that wallboard, and it actually raises the grain of it. You sand that stuff down, and then you start your 2 top coats, whatever you like. And if your drywall is worth of salt, you can use a low luster paint. You can use an eggshell or a satin. With new drywall nowadays, most people want to moderate the shine a little bit, because at least in our area, new drywall is such at a low quality level $6 million homes and tract apartments all get done with the same products and the same process, and they all look horrible. So most builders, most homeowners ask me to sort of, take the shine down a little bit so you don't show any flaws. So either way, you don't have to spend a lot of money on PVA primer, but spend some money on a top coat. You don't always have to get the highest end paint, but you should be in the top 20% of that product line as far as cost. And in a basement like this, the difference between getting super high-end premium paint and the worst stuff you can get is probably only a couple $100. So penny wise, pound foolish.
All right, thank you. Last question. I know you always insist on using the best paints possible, but somebody on a homeowner budget, what's a good paint to use and what are some to avoid? And I guess I understand if you don't want to necessarily talk about a product you don't like or whatever, but what are some good paints at a more affordable level?
No, absolutely. And I will give you the same advice like I did here. There's times where you spend a lot of money and there's times where you don't. If you're going to paint the outside of your house, I see almost no reason to use anything but the highest end exterior paint you can get. So go to the big 3 to 5 manufacturers. I'll use Benjamin Moore and Sherwin-Williams and Ace Hardware as examples. When you're doing the exterior of your house, as a homeowner or a pro, labor is the vast majority of the inputs into a project like that. And again, the difference between getting Benjamin Moore Aura versus a property management paint in your house would probably be $150, $200. So your labor is everything. It's not the paint. Now, inside, you don't necessarily have to use the most premium paint. At some point, there's diminishing returns, and you're paying for things you may not need. Good example might be, Sherwin-Williams has an awesome interior paint called Duration. There's another paint called Emerald that's priced probably a little more than that. The only benefit to Emerald is its eco-friendliness. It's not going to give you more durability. It's not going to give you any better coverage, at least in my experiments in the field. So at that point, you're basically paying more for environmental concerns, things like that, and concerns that may or may not be important because most of the paints we use now are so low VOC and so earth friendly. So my go-to interior paint, if you're looking around for it, a hidden gem in the market, and I should say this before you move on. I am a generalist. I take every paint that's available to me and I try to find what's good, what's bad, what gives me the highest quality finish, and it doesn't necessarily have to always be the highest end product. So one of my go-to interior repaint paints is actually a Valspar product through Ace Hardware. Dollar for dollar, it performs exactly, if not within 98% of a product like Benjamin Moore Aura at about half the price. So it's sort of one of the hidden gems in the market, and if you're price conscious as a homeowner, you're probably looking at $35 for a gallon of paint versus maybe 70. So yes, it's half the price, but still, if you're going to paint a bedroom and you're worried about the extra $35, I would be way more concerned about spending money on a good roller cover, a good brush. That's going to give you a way better result with a paint maybe halfway through the quality range versus using a roller head that's just going to shed everywhere, a crappy chip brush, and you're only as good as a lot of the tools and stuff you use. So I guess that would be my best advice. But yeah, spend the money outside. Don't necessarily spend the money inside, but it's going to make your life a lot easier. And all in all, paint is the cheap part of the project, especially if you're a homeowner doing it evenings and weekends. The worst case scenario is you want to save $30 on a gallon of paint and you end up having to do a 4th coat of a red in your dining room. And at that point, how much do you hate your family? If you just want to paint and not hang out with your family, that's one thing. But for guys like you and me, Jim, we want to do super high-end home projects at our house. We want to do them to a high degree of quality, but we also have a family to tend to. So you kind of have, is that $30 worth an extra day of your labor in it? And probably not. So.
All right, man. Well, I got to sign off here, but I'd like to thank you for having me on your show, and just a plug for Nick and his company, they did the exterior and a living room in my house last summer. And as I said before, I also worked for Nick. Very, very professional crew. Nick's really into what he does, and highest recommendation. I get compliments on my house all the time, and he's also a good guy to work for too. So thanks, Nick, for having me today. Appreciate it very much.
Anytime. And I did not pay you that much for that statement either.
No, he paid me nothing. I have all the Ask a Painter swag, though. I'm very proud to say that.
Well, you've been a great contributor, and this is the least way I can show you with a mug, and then being one of the first, well, the first homeowner guest on my show. So I know you got a job, Jim. Have fun, and